Welcome to this deep dive. Lots of you have sent in some really fascinating stuff about, why we sometimes get in our own way when we're trying to achieve things.
Yeah, it's a common struggle.
Absolutely. And we've got a chapter here that really focuses on building emotional intelligence as maybe a key to figuring this out. So let's jump in.
Sounds good.
We're going to touch on, well, everything from how our brains work around desire, the subconscious mind, how change actually happens.
Right. And those cognitive biases too, and
Mhm.
worry, anxiety, all that plays a part in this self-sabotage picture.
Exactly. So the mission today really is to dig into the root causes, like the source material presents them, and pull out some, actionable ideas to help us maybe stop tripping ourselves up.
And it's interesting how this chapter kicks off by linking low emotional intelligence directly to self-sabotage. It's not just about not knowing yourself.
Sure.
It frames it as the actual foundation of it. Basically, emotional intelligence is defined as understanding, interpreting, and importantly, healthily responding to your emotions. And the argument is, if you don't have that internal compass, you're kind of flying blind. Makes sense. You'd end up going down paths that don't actually lead where you want to go.
Right, like you're lost without that emotional GPS. So, okay, if emotional intelligence is the compass, this source then says something kind of counterintuitive,
Hmm.
that our brains aren't really set up for just enjoying the win. Like, once we achieve a goal, we're not wired to just sit back and be content.
Yeah, that's a really key point it makes. It's almost like we hit the summit and immediately start scanning the horizon for the next mountain.
Yeah.
Sustained satisfaction feels weirdly unnatural sometimes.
So what's going on there neurologically?
Well, it brings in dopamine, referencing Daniel Lieberman's work, The Molecule of More. The idea is dopamine isn't so much about the pleasure of having something.
Okay.
It's more about the pleasure of wanting it, the chase, the anticipation. Once you get the thing, the dopamine kind of, well, it fades, and then you're looking for the next hit, the next pursuit.
Huh. So, and this is where it gets tricky. Could that drive, that constant wanting, actually make us sabotage ourselves? Like subconsciously, we dread that endless cycle.
That's exactly the connection the source makes. It talks about this toxic cocktail of neurological biases that pops up when we're chasing goals.
Toxic cocktail. Like what?
Well, things like starting to resent the very thing you desire or being so afraid of failing you just stop trying.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe you've judged others for having what you want, so subconsciously you think having it makes you bad.
Wow. Okay.
And then there's that fear of loss. You get close to something good and you push it away because you're scared of losing it later. It's like a preemptive defense mechanism.
That makes a strange kind of sense. And the source mentioned unrealistic expectations too, right? Like pinning too much hope on one thing.
Absolutely. Loading up our desires with these massive expectations. The example used was expecting a new partner to cure your depression.
Right. That's not fair to anyone.
Exactly. And when reality inevitably doesn't match that sky-high hope, it's easy to just throw your hands up and give up on the whole thing.
And we even justify not having what we want.
Yeah. Our brains are clever like that. We might start criticizing people who do have it, get cynical about their success.
Okay.
So then, if we finally get there, all that negativity we've built up makes it really hard to actually enjoy it. We doubt it. We wait for the other shoe to drop.
It's like we're stuck in wanting mode and can't shift gears to having.
Precisely. That transition feels really foreign and uncomfortable.
So it's not just conscious thoughts then. The source talks about the subconscious and this homeostatic impulse. What's that about? Maintaining balance.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Your subconscious is like this regulator, not just for physical things like body temperature, but for your mental and emotional state too. It wants to keep things stable, familiar.
And that's where confirmation bias fits in. Filtering information.
Exactly. Your mind actively looks for proof that supports what you already believe and how you already behave. It keeps you tucked inside your comfort zone.
Even if that comfort zone isn't actually comfortable or good for us.
Right. Because even positive change, something genuinely good, can feel uncomfortable at first simply because it's new. It disrupts that familiar state.
Which explains getting stuck in bad habits, even if they feel okay short term. They're known, predictable.
That's the trap. The familiar, even if it's destructive, feels safer than the unknown positive change. The source really stresses using conscious thought here, deciding who you want to be, what direction you want to go, and then giving yourself the time to actually get used to that new reality, to let it become the new familiar.
Okay, so when it comes to making those changes, the source pushes back against waiting for some big breakthrough moment.
Yeah, it really debunks that myth of the sudden epiphany that changes everything overnight.
Instead, it talks about micro shifts, small steps.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Real change, it argues, happens gradually. Tiny, consistent actions. Like, it mentions Ryan Holiday saying big epiphanies rarely stick,
Hmm.
and Thomas Kuhn's idea about paradigm shifts happening slowly as old assumptions just kind of unravel over time, not in one big flash.
So, like, instead of vowing to meditate for an hour a day starting tomorrow,
Maybe just start with 1 minute, or if you want to cut down phone time, just try checking it one less time today than yesterday. Little things.
healthier eating, add half a glass of water, more sleep, go to bed 5 minutes earlier, tiny adjustment.
Right. Because those huge leaps often trigger that comfort zone resistance immediately. They feel too big, too threatening.
But the small shifts sneak under the radar.
Kind of. And over time, through repetition, they become habits. They become easier. The source makes a powerful point. Outcomes are governed by principle, by consistent action, not just by passion or feeling motivated in the moment.
Like that penny doubling example. Seems like nothing at first, but the consistency compounds. Okay, shifting gears slightly. The anti-fragile mind. What's that concept?
So anti-fragile isn't just resilient, like bouncing back. It's actually getting stronger from stress and adversity.
Stronger because of it.
Yeah, like the source uses analogies. Pressure turns carbon into diamonds. Exposure to germs strengthens the immune system. The idea is our minds are similar. They need challenges to grow and develop that resilience.
So maybe that tendency some of us have to, I don't know, almost look for problems or create drama when things are calm. It's not just being messed up.
Not necessarily. The chapter suggests it could be the mind seeking that necessary stimulation, that chance to strengthen itself.
Huh.
It does warn against that cultural push for constant happiness, avoiding anything triggering, because that can actually make us weaker mentally.
Interesting. It also connects creating problems to feeling a lack of control elsewhere in life.
Yes, that too.
Yeah.
But the core idea is that adversity isn't just something to endure. It can be a catalyst for creativity, engagement, growth.
So the key is channeling that need for challenge towards real problems we can actually do something about, engaging with what we can control.
Exactly. Developing that grit, as the source puts it, instead of trying to bubble wrap our existence.
Okay, but what happens when we do make positive changes? When we achieve something good? The source mentions adjustment shock.
This is such a crucial point, often missed. Even good changes, things we've wanted and worked for, can feel really unsettling at first.
Unsettling. Why?
Because our psyche just seems wired to see anything new as potentially disruptive. Familiarity feels safe, even if the familiar situation wasn't great.
So even good things like getting married, having a baby, landing a dream job, they can actually trigger like depressive episodes.
It happens several reasons. There's often a big mood spike with the event, followed by a natural dip.
Right.
Plus, those unrealistic expectations we talked about, thinking this one thing will solve everything and bring endless bliss. Reality rarely matches that.
Okay.
And also, big changes can stir up unconscious stuff. Beliefs we didn't even know we had. Like if you were raised thinking money is bad, actually becoming wealthy might feel deeply uncomfortable on a level you don't quite grasp.
Or wanting fame for love, but then resisting it because you fear criticism.
Exactly. Deep-seated conflicts coming to the surface.
And the source also says achieving big goals forces us to shift from just surviving or striving.
To thriving, and that brings up bigger questions, right?
Yeah.
About purpose, meaning stuff you maybe didn't have headspace for when you were just trying to get by.
That can definitely be uncomfortable. New territory.
For sure. Big wins often mean more responsibility, more self-reflection. It's work. So the solution offered is about consciously adjusting your mindset.
How?
Really working to align with the new reality, making the new good thing feel familiar, reminding yourself you are ready for this, you do deserve it,
Yeah.
actively recalibrating.
Okay, let's dive into some specific mental traps. The source talks about psychic thinking. Not actually psychic, I assume?
Huh. No, definitely not. It means things like assuming you know exactly what someone else is thinking or feeling,
Right, mind reading.
or predicting the absolute worst case, least likely outcome just because you have a bad feeling, or constantly daydreaming about the life not lived, the other path you could have taken, or thinking that intense initial spark with someone means they're automatically your perfect match forever.
Yeah, those sound familiar. It's like a recipe for anxiety and disappointment.
Totally. Because you start believing these negative thoughts or projections are real, are predictive. The source points out how tricky the advice, trust your gut, can be here.
How so?
Because we might mistake fear or just a random anxious thought for genuine intuition. We need to learn to tell the difference between a real gut feeling and just noise.
That makes sense. And this links into the cognitive biases it discusses, like confirmation bias. How does that specifically sabotage us?
Well, like we touched on, your brain actively hunts for evidence that proves your existing beliefs right. So if you secretly believe you're going to fail,
You'll notice every little setback and ignore the progress.
exactly, you filter reality to match the belief, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy.
And then there's extrapolation, taking current feelings and stretching them out forever.
Yeah. Feeling stressed right now and concluding, I will always be stressed. Feeling anxious and thinking, this anxiety will never end. It makes problems feel permanent and unsolvable.
Which is rarely true. And the last one mentioned was spotlighting.
That's the feeling that everyone is watching you, judging your every mistake, noticing every flaw, like you're constantly under a microscope.
When in reality, most people are wrapped up in their own stuff.
Precisely. We're usually way more critical of ourselves than anyone else is. So you combine these biases with that psychic thinking.
And you get a really warped view of reality that just fuels anxiety and self-doubt.
Absolutely. The advice is basically stop trying to predict the future based on feelings and biases. Focus on the present. Focus on what you can actually do.
Now, the source has this really interesting take on anxiety, not just overthinking, but maybe underthinking. A logical lapse.
Yeah, that's a fascinating counter perspective. The idea is anxiety isn't always about thinking too much, but maybe not thinking things through logically and completely.
How does that work?
When you have a logical lapse, you jump straight to the worst case scenario. You don't walk through the steps. Okay, if X happens, then I could do Y or ask Z for help or use resource W. You just leap to disaster.
Okay. Like the fear of flying example. You're not afraid if you can picture the whole flight, including dealing with turbulence and landing safely. You've thought it through.
Exactly. You've considered coping mechanisms. It connects to why exposure therapy works for phobias. You prove to yourself, through experience and reasoning, that you can handle the feared situation.
So mental strength isn't about avoiding difficulty.
It's about believing you can cope. And you build that belief by tackling smaller challenges, developing those reasoning skills, thinking things through properly.
It comes back to our thoughts about events, not the events themselves.
That's the core message. Manage the thinking, and you reclaim your emotional freedom.
Okay, this leads to faulty inferences, and it used an interesting analogy about body types, like endomorphs maybe having good metabolisms despite stereotypes.
Right. The point being, sometimes traits that seem negative on the surface have hidden adaptive strengths, and it draws a parallel to highly intelligent people and anxiety.
How so?
Highly intelligent brains are often really good at inference, spotting patterns, connecting dots, identifying potential threats from subtle cues. That's great for problem solving.
But it can go wrong.
Yes, that strength can lead to faulty inferences, drawing the wrong conclusion from evidence that might be technically correct but is misinterpreted.
Like seeing a connection that isn't really causal, or making a huge generalization from one example.
Exactly. Hasty generalizations, false cause effect, false dichotomies, slippery slopes, all examples the source gives. Anxiety gets fueled when you take harmless info and infer disaster from it.
So your pattern-spotting brain spots a pattern that's actually just nulls or misinterprets it.
Pretty much. And the fix proposed is twofold. First, just become aware you're doing it. Notice the faulty leaps in logic.
Okay, self-awareness.
Second, consciously practice replacing those faulty inferences with more logical, evidence-based thinking. It takes time, like retraining your mind's search engine to look for accuracy, not just potential threats.
Retraining the search engine. I like that. Okay, finally, worry. The source calls it the weakest defense system. Why weak?
Well, it acknowledges that, neurologically, rumination and creativity can be linked. But it slams the idea that we need worry or crisis to function or protect ourselves.
So the belief that if I worry about it, I'll be prepared is flawed.
Deeply flawed, according to this. Excessive worrying doesn't prepare you, it just makes you hypersensitive to negativity. It can even create a self-fulfilling prophecy where you're so primed for panic, you do panic.
And there's that reinforcement thing. If you worry and the bad thing doesn't happen.
You mistakenly think the worry prevented it, which of course it didn't, especially if it was unlikely anyway. So you keep worrying because you think it's working.
It's a vicious cycle. So what's the alternative to just stewing in worry?
The source suggests a few things. Try looking at the situation like an impartial observer would. How would they handle it?
Okay, get some distance.
Visualize actually getting through the problem. What opportunities might even arise from it? Focus on building real self-esteem, trusting your ability to cope.
Right.
And fundamentally challenge the idea that life requires this constant balancing act, that good times must be paid for with worry about bad times. Stability and peace are possible.
So worrying feels like protection, but it actually holds us back.
That's the gist. It scratches a primal itch to feel safe, but it's a really ineffective, ultimately harmful way to do it.
Wow. Okay. So let's try and wrap this up. We've covered a lot of ground here. It seems self-sabotage isn't just one thing, is it? It's tied deeply into our emotional intelligence or lack thereof,
Uh-huh.
and how our brains are wired for wanting, not necessarily having, how change itself feels uncomfortable because of that homeostatic impulse.
Right. And that real change comes from those tiny, consistent microshifts, not waiting for lightning bolts.
And that our minds actually get stronger with challenges. They're anti-fragile. We also touched on that weird adjustment shock after good things happen.
Yeah, and how our own thinking traps us, that psychic thinking, the cognitive biases like confirmation bias, extrapolation, spotlighting.
And how anxiety might be underthinking, those logical lapses, the faulty inferences.
And finally, how worry is just,
Yeah.
well, a really poor defense strategy that ends up hurting more than helping.
It really paints a picture of how much of this battle is internal based on misunderstanding ourselves and how our minds work.
Exactly. And you see how they all connect. Low emotional intelligence makes you prone to biases and faulty thinking. That thinking fuels anxiety and makes change feel threatening, reinforcing the comfort zone.
Which makes microshifts seem hard, even though they're the most effective path. And it makes us misinterpret both challenges and successes.
But understanding these mechanisms is empowering. Knowing why change feels weird or why your brain jumps to conclusions gives you a starting point to intervene consciously.
Right. It's not about eliminating these things entirely, maybe, but about recognizing them and choosing a different response.
Precisely. Building that awareness, practicing those different responses through microshifts, learning to think things through more logically, that's the path forward outlined here.
So hopefully for you listening, this deep dive has sparked some insights, maybe some of those aha moments about your own patterns. So here's a final thought to leave you with, maybe something a bit provocative. Knowing all this now, understanding these internal gears turning, what's just one small, maybe even tiny micro shift you could consider making today?
It's just one.
Just one little step to start overriding those old self-sabotage habits, to move towards what you want with, I don't know, a bit more awareness and maybe a little less resistance, something to mull over. Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive.